So we are one beam short. As much as I hate to do it, we're gonna take this tree out right here. Liz and I are getting married here on the homestead later this fall. We thought it would be a really good idea to have a pergola in the garden. Liz was really excited to have a bench swing, and I started to think it would be really nice to have this pergola for the wedding. It would be the perfect backdrop for our vows. It would create a centerpiece in the garden, and it would be just the perfect way to tie it all together so that we could actually have our wedding in front of our house. And I thought it'd be cool to grow grapes in the garden and have some shade from the heat and a place for people to hang out. This grape, it's been giving us an incredible amount of food. These things are so delicious that it's inspired me to build one in the garden too. And just in time for our wedding, cool, yeah. So we get to get married under this structure that I built and designed, and I'm just so freaking excited about it. We dreamed up a pergola that would serve all of these purposes. So I sketched up something that seemed relatively simple and something that matched the aesthetic of this straw bale homestead. So good quality eastern red cedar that's got that really bright red heart that's super termite and decay resistant is going for about $3 to $4 a board foot. And when I did the calculations, it ended up being like probably $2,000 just to buy the lumber to build this pergola, as simple as it was. So I said, no way. I'm sitting here looking at a line of cedar trees. They're blocking good access to the garden. They're difficult to mow around because they're all so tight together within 3 or 4 feet of each other. So it seemed like a win-win kind of situation in that we could take out these cedar trees, I could mill them up in the sawmill, and we'd have timbers for a pergola and save $2,000. We decided on a 10-foot by 10-foot pergola. I wanted to keep the beam as high as possible so that it could actually create a good swing high enough so that it would actually be a place for people to hang out. So once I had this thing sketched up, I made a cut list from the SketchUp drawings and started marking trees that looked like I might be able to get the timbers I needed out of them. And we were gonna get some rain, so we jumped on it at 7 a.m. We were up, cranking up those chainsaws, climbing the trees, tying up as high as we could get them so we could cut and pull these things down one after another. As Joe would limb up one of the trees that we just fell, I would go ahead and climb up the next tree, rig it up as high as I could, and then basically feed out the rope so that as soon as Joe was finished limbing that next tree, I'd be ready to pull this next one down as he made his cuts. So we felled like 20 trees that morning. We hauled probably half the mass of these trees is in the branchy tops that we either have to burn and drag to a burn pile. I'm like, you know what? There's got to be a better way to do this. 2019, New Year's, I resolved to burn less. And I would much rather be chipping all of this stuff up than burning it. Dragging it to a burn pile and manning a fire takes so much more energy. Why don't we just get a wood chipper? I can chip up this brush and have it be amazing mulch for our garden. I've got all these logs laying on the ground. We gotta mill them. Let's just do it. Part of the way through it, honestly, I ended up getting really worried. All of a sudden, I started to realize that these aren't saw logs. These logs were branchy, field-grown fence line trees that were not straight, They were difficult to mill, and they went in a lot of places from like 12 inches around to 4 inches at the top. And this thing looks like a banana, and we need to somehow mill into a square straight beam. And so I'm sitting on the sawmill thinking, what are we gonna do now? I've already felled all these trees. I've spent days chipping up the brush, and now I've got logs that I can barely even use. Do we just go ahead and square up the timbers, get as much lumber as we can out of each one, and get nice clean cuts so that we can have clean joinery that's gonna last?
This is about 5 inches to the center off the deck right here.
Let's see what the center is off the deck. All right, so if this is 10, right, half is 5, or about. So I think we're good for this first rip. Clamps are solid. And I need to gear up so we can mill this thing down. Things started working out for me once I just gave it up. I let go of the idea that I'm gonna have these perfect dimensional all heartwood beams from the land. That would have been awesome, but it was never in the cards. So we built this pergola with 8x8 posts and 5x8 beams, with 3x5 purlins spanning across the top like joists that are gonna hold up this grapevine. I mean, they're big, beefy timbers. I don't like to build things that look like they're gonna fall down. We don't need a concrete footing, we don't need hold downs. We're setting the 8x8s right on firm, tamped subsoil, and we're moving forward. We laid out a 10-foot by 10-foot square and dug holes at each corner for the posts, just enough to get firm subsoil and have some dirt to pin the bottom of the post from kicking out. We took a builder's level and measured the relative depth of each hole that we ended up digging so we could make each post the right height so that they would all be level at the top once we stuck them in the ground. Once we knew what our shortest post length was going to be based on those relative dimensions, we were able to go ahead and cut that with the notches and all, and then measure the space between the bottom notch where that 5x8 will sit all the way down to where the post will sit on the ground. And then we added length to the other posts to accommodate for the different depths of holes that we had already stuck and tamped down in the ground. That way we didn't have to get the bottom of each hole at the same exact elevation. And then we plumbed each post and braced them off. We have a foot overhang on each side of the 8x8 posts, so we know our 5x8 beams need to be 12 feet long. So we cut them exactly 12 feet long and put a decorative cut on each end. We came down a third of the width from the top, which is 2.5 inches. The 5x8 bears the weight of the roof. We installed them first and put 2 5/8 galvanized carriage bolts into each end to connect them to the 8x8 posts. The intersecting beams are 4x8s, so we decided to pare down the intersecting beams and make them 4x8s, really, since we didn't have a whole lot of lumber that we were working with, and actually to make sure that we had 4 inches of meat that we could drive these bolts through. So essentially, when we bolt the 5x8 to the top of the post, we're bolting through 4 inches wide. A continuous piece that comes up from the top of that post is 4 inches wide, and we're bolting 2 bolts through that. The opposite end, we're coming through a 3-inch wide section that's 4 inches thick and bolting to that. So that's our post and beam connection. When we went to grab the second 5x8, we looked at it and realized that, wow, this thing there's a lot of bark on it, so it's certainly mostly sapwood. And when we actually got to looking at it, it looked like most of this thing was gonna rot away and our joinery would be really sloppy. We'd have a notch in the top of the 8x8 and just a really, really shoddy looking beam that was relying on the bolts strictly through this little notch at the top, and I didn't want to do that. So I'm sitting there kind of freaking out because all of a sudden I got my crew here, we're putting this thing up, and we don't have the second beam. This was the beam that was going to hold that bench swing. It couldn't be a waned, gnarly sapwood 5x8. And then I look up and I see this tree, and sure enough, I looked at it, I measured up, it was about probably 13 feet to where it split off and branched. I'm like, yes, this is it. So I was like, Liz, I'm cutting this thing down. You cool with that? She said, yeah. And bam, I got the saw out and I measured how far it was gonna be, and I'm sitting there looking at this tree like, oh my God, I don't need another challenge right now, but the wind is blowing towards the pergola, towards the post that we're working on, towards the garden. This could not be good, potentially. So we are one beam short. As much as I hate to do it, we're gonna take this tree out right here. And because it's actually got enough material to get another 5x8 beam. And I'm hoping actually this all goes well so that we can mill up our 5x8 beam and keep on rolling as quick as possible. But we'll see how it goes here. Yeah, baby. Surprisingly, the cedar trees we fell were kinked and branchy enough that I had a rough time even getting 8 little 3x5s for the roof purlins. And actually having enough heartwood that they wouldn't mostly rot out in the first 5 years. But I made it work. I even ripped some of these straight down the middle, which of course, as you rip a log like that and you cut it right down the middle, as you get through it, it's gonna bow out like that. 2 of them especially are really bowed as we sit them on top, so we had to straighten them out to make them look decent in the end. What's up, y'all? I'm out here building the pergola for the garden and putting in the last few blocks up there in between each one of the purlins to keep them from racking. One course above the beam, which is pretty typical because that's where the point that they would roll on, and then one mid-span in between the 2 beams. What I've been able to do is straighten out a couple of the really bowed ones. For instance, this outer beam right here was really bowed way out, so I screwed the block onto this inside one right there and onto the beam, and then pulled this thing in to straighten it out. If you sight down the line of this thing, it is not straight. It goes like that. We're gonna pull it. We're gonna pull this thing in tight. But instead of trying to close this gap right here with a smaller block and trying to force it in, I'm gonna secure this block into these 2 into that straight rafter and wedge it out to the beam out. It's a whole lot less force for me to deal with. Bingo. I resawed a couple inches off each end of a 5x5. And I had enough material to cut 8 of these 30-inch long knee braces with a 45-degree cut on each end. For now, I've just tacked them up with a screw on each end until I can bolt them off with some 5x8 lag screws in the future. Pin that there until we come back and lag bolt it. And then bam, just like that, it was done. Took off the temporary braces and stood back. And it looked beautiful. I was so stoked. And now we have an amazing place for our special day. My goal is to bring what we do, which I feel a lot of people are so inspired and in awe by carpentry and real skills, that you'll be inspired to help us out too. Smash that like button, subscribe to our channel. Peace.